You're going to love this. Frank inquired about converting the Baldy Inn to a residential VFW.
But no, we got my mom's cabinets redone.
Pardon? 138 beds.
You took your husband with you? No?
I told him that.
Oh, okay. Well, good for you.
Yeah, no. Yeah. Well, what I basically told him is that it's not, it's not contemplating this much code.
When that marijuana dispensary nominate, we can't be that close to something like that, I don't think. There's ordinances. No, we have to look at our ordinance on that because there's specifications about how close to the school and all that. Because it's right there in the building. So you know where Saki's is? Go around the corner on the south side where you have backsides that.
I tend to agree with her. I was back on the tax rate. These people back in the general fund as soon as possible.
I don't have much in the way of my report.
No? If you're good with Chuck, that's fine. Yeah, and I'll chime in if I think I need to.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I call to order the regular meeting of the Sierra Vista City Council for February 22nd, 2018. Madam Clerk, may we have a roll call, please?
Mayor Rick Mueller.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Alicia Ash.
Present.
Councilmember Bob Blanchard.
Here.
Councilmember Gwen Calhoun.
Present.
Councilmember Rachel Gray.
Present.
Councilmember Craig Mount.
Present.
Councilmember Christine Wolf.
Present.
Mr. Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mrs. Adams. We'll start tonight as we do every night with the invocation followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Tonight the invocation will be led by Pastor Joe White of the Calvary, I can't even speak, Calvary Chapel. There we go. And then the Pledge of Allegiance will be led by Mrs. Calhoun. Will you please rise? Mrs. Gray, excuse me.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we pray and ask for your blessing over tonight. We thank you for the freedoms we have in our country. We thank you that we have privileges and rights as in our city. Lord, I pray for our mayor and our councilmen and women, Lord, for all that are represented here. I pray for the community that's here. Lord, I pray that you'd bless them with the words to speak their thoughts and to articulate those thoughts. Lord, we pray for wisdom as just a group of citizens here. And Father, we thank you that, again, we can come together and resolve issues, present concerns. And Lord, again, we just pray for your blessing and your wisdom over tonight. In our Savior's name, Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Please join me in the pledge. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Please be seated. Thank you, Pastor Joe White. Thank you, Ms. Gray. We now move on to item number 1, acceptance of the agenda. Mr. Blanchard.
Mr. Mayor, I move that the agenda for the regular city council meeting of February 22nd, 2018 be approved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any additions, completions, or additions, amendments? She's laughing at me. Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. We now move on to awards and presentations. Tonight we have a Business of the Month award. It's going to be offered by Councilman Blanchard. I would ask the representatives for Pettit's Auto Care to join me up front, please. Hi, how are you guys? Black. Come over here. will face the audience so that you're on TV and people know you're big TV stars now. The City Council has a Business of the Month award, and this nomination came from Councilman Blanchard. Bob, do you want to read the
I will.
citation, please?
An original family-owned business, Greg Marianne and David Pettit opened Pettit's Auto Care in October of 1986. As ASE certified master technicians, they are able to provide expert technical support for your vehicle. David is also a certified advanced level specialist in auto electronic diagnostics. After the passing of Greg on October 15, 2000, David and his mother Mary Ann kept the business and have built it into a highly regarded business it is today. Even before his death, Greg Pettit and his son David, along with their staff, had been involved with Buena High School Automotive Advisory Committee. Now nearly 3 decades, they have provided support and guidance to its automotive educators on business needs and trends. At the same time, they recognize the value of our youth in the future, and as a result, David has hired many Buena High School automotive student graduates and allowed them to apply their skills in the Sierra Vista workforce. Pettit's Auto Care has accepted the challenge of remaining current in their own education as well as through industry and manufacturer provided classes and clinics. This provides the basis for keeping them proficient in using the advanced computer and electronic test equipment in the automotive industry today. Based on these achievements, I, Bob Blanchard, would like to recognize David Pettit and Pettit's Auto Care as the City of Sierra Vista Business of the Month for February 2018.
That's great.
I would just like to thank my wife, my father, who started the business with me, and thank you to the City of Sierra Vista for support.
All right, thank you. Move on to the report, Mr.
Thank you, Mayor Mueller, members of the council. Brief report tonight. Our next work session is scheduled for Tuesday p.m. That'll be our normal update work session, and that will be here in the council chambers. And just one project, I attended with Victoria at the county buildings this morning, meeting of the Southeast Arizona Communications Center Board, the Joint Powers Authority that I chair. And I'm pleased to report that the project is on track to be implemented and up and operational in June. We look forward to a visit from the governor in the interim to look at the center, and of course we can express our thanks for the support that the state's given us in that time. But things are moving along very smoothly now, and I think we'll work through the issues as they come up, but I believe it will be up and running in June. And that's all I have tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patuchik. Any questions for Mr. Patuchik on his report? All right, then we'll move on to the public hearing items. First item tonight, item number 2, Mr. Mount.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I move that Resolution 2018-015, Development Code Text Amendment, Article 151.02.004, definitions of agricultural animals, 30-day public comment period be approved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. And Mr. Pregler, I understand we have 2 items tonight that are similar. And for the audience out there, the first one deals specifically with removing chickens from a list of agricultural animals in our, is it the development code? And the meat of the issue is item number 3.
The city code.
And I don't want to offend any chicken folks out there that would be concerned about me using the word of meat, because I know we're looking for eggs from the chickens. Okay. So, Mr. Pregler.
Thank you, Mayor Mueller and members of council. And also to clarify, because the 2 resolutions are so similar, there'll only be one presentation for both resolutions tonight. Okay, so I want to talk to you tonight about potential code amendments for domestic fowl. The development code only allows chickens currently and ducks within urban ranch zoning district, and this has been in place for about 15, 20 years since the development code came into effect. In 2012, there was a movement at that time for code amendments to be approved to allow chickens in residential zoning districts in 2012. However, given the number of opposition, that process was halted until 2017, when the city was approached by members of the public to once again amend the city code to allow domestic fowl in residential zoning districts. And on December 12th, 2017, at a city council work session, staff was given direction to proceed with the code amendments. Now, I wanted to clarify that the amendments are per the proponent's recommendations, not necessarily staff's recommendations. The P&Z Commission held 2 public hearings on the amendments, January 16th and February 6th. They did recommend approval with the vote of 3-2, with additional recommendations, as I will discuss during the presentation. So the First Amendment has to do with the definition of domestic fowl. As Mayor Mueller indicated, that chickens are currently defined as agricultural animals. The First Amendment would be to remove chickens out of that definition and to relocate them under the city code and define them as domestic fowl. And domestic fowl will be defined as being limited to ducks and female chickens. Location requirements. The amendments would indicate that fowl will be limited to properties that include single-family residential detached dwellings. So this not only includes the single-family residential zoning districts, but it also includes the multifamily residential zoning districts and also the zoning districts that allow a mobile home residential zoning districts as well, such as the Solgar subdivision, as one example. I believe I gave you on the staff memo a breakdown of the zoning districts and the lot sizes, and you will tell from the zoning districts that over 50% of the lots in the community are at 8,000 square feet or less. The second amendment relates to setbacks for hen houses, coops, and runs, and it states that they shall be located no closer than 5 feet from a property line or 20 feet from a residence on an adjacent property. The quantity, the amendments are proposing that there be 1 domestic fowl for every 1,000 square feet on the lot that houses the domestic fowl. The P&Z had a recommendation that there would be 1 fowl for every 2,000 square feet, and that there be a total cap of 20 fowl per property. Talk a little bit about noise and odors. Number 1 is that roosters would be prohibited. Secondly, property would have to be maintained so that odors related to the domestic fowl are not detectable at the property boundaries. And 3, that the sale of eggs or other products derived from the fowl is prohibited to be sold on the property. Containment. Fowl shall be kept in a secure hen house, coop, or run during non-daylight hours and when unsupervised. Secondly, the yard area must be enclosed with opaque fencing that is adequate to contain the fowl on the property. And 3, that the size of the hen house, coop, and run shall not be less than 4 square feet per fowl. Living conditions. Hen houses, coops, and runs shall be impermeable to rodents, birds, and predators, and designed to prevent the harboring of animals underneath the structures. Secondly, hen houses, coops, runs shall be kept in a neat condition, including clean and dry bedding and regular removal of waste materials. And thirdly, feed or other items likely to attract rodents shall be kept in secure, protected containers, except there will be a constant water supply for the fowl. Registration and licensing. One of the recommendations that the amendments are asking for is that domestic fowl be banded using tags provided by the Service to Animal Control shelter. And the purpose for this is to be able to provide bands for individual chickens, which will give them individual identification numbers, which will be then associated with contact information. So if the fowl were to escape and is picked up by the shelter, they'd be able to contact the property owner and have them pick up their fowl. Now, the P&Z Commission recommended that FOWL comply with requirements of the National Poultry Improvement Plan. And this is actually a plan which kind of regulates and monitors and tests chickens to regulate the diseases from these chickens. This is currently a voluntary program within the state. However, it is geared towards commercial breeders. You have to have at least 30 chickens or more to qualify. There's already a regulation, federal regulation, that any chickens that come into Arizona have to meet this requirement already. In talking with some of the local feed stores, they receive these chickens. These chickens have already received this MPIP certification, so they've already met this requirement. However, the Planning and Zoning Commission felt this was a necessary recommendation to, again, minimize the spread of diseases. Sunset provision, the P&Z Commission recommends a 3-year sunset provision be included in the ordinance. It wouldn't necessarily be in the 30-day public record, but this would be during the ordinance phase of the amendment process. Public comments. As I mentioned earlier, this went to the P&Z Commission. 4 citizens spoke in favor of the amendments on January 16th. 2 citizens spoke in favor on February 6th. The city has also received a number of written public comments, both in favor and in opposition. We received 50 in support with a petition with over 200 plus signatures, and 35 in opposition. Those in opposition have cited reasons such as a decrease in property values, noise and odors. It would attract predators and rodents, and just a general philosophy that chickens and ducks and fowl in general should be rural and in agricultural areas, not necessarily in urban areas.
Jeff, before you go too much further, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
With the concerns of the people who are in opposition, where we talk about, I guess, since you have the list up, the decrease in property values, generally speaking, and maybe city manager can address some of this, but generally speaking, the property values in Sierra Vista, without chickens already being allowed, have had some problems over the last several years anyways, correct?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Mount, a lot of times we go through different issues, could pertain to rezonings, could pertain to, conditional uses of buildings. So a lot of times that concern comes out. Now, in my experience, though, it seems to me that market forces and economic forces drive property values more so than any individual actions that the council may take.
Thank you, Chuck. And then as far as the noise and odors, the people who are asking for this are not asking for any reduction in the actual standards of our current code, whether it's Chapter 90 or 93, when it comes to noise or odor enforcement. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then with your as far as predators and rodents go, your recommendations on how the coops are maintained, in your opinion, I don't own chickens, but in your opinion, would that help safeguard that provision or that concern with the public?
Mayor Mueller, Councilmember Mount, and some of my research I've looked at from other communities, this is a pretty standard condition for that exact reason, to try to reduce or minimize the attraction of predators and rodents. So I can just base it on some other codes that I've reviewed.
And then as far as fowl being rural or agricultural animals, I agree they're agricultural, with the exception of the MPO status, given our size and position within the state, the amount of people we have. I think one of the questions I would have is, are we or are we not considered a rural community by some definitions at least, if not by most? And that's just a general question that could probably be batted back and forth, so. Go ahead.
Okay, please.
Wait, I had one question.
Yes, ma'am.
Jeff, when you talk about the number of the 50 in support and the 35 in opposition, is that letters going just to you guys, or letters also coming to the mayor and council address?
Mayor Mueller, Councilmember Gray, these are letters that went directly to the mayor and city council. In fact, they're in I believe they're in their council reading room.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are peacocks considered a domestic fowl?
Mayor Mueller, Councilmember Blanchard, under the proposed definition, they would be considered domestic fowl.
Great.
What else you got, Jeff?
Just a couple of quick things. At the work session, it was mentioned that the city manager was not in support of these amendments, and also I wanted to mention as staff, because these amendments are coming from the proponent, staff has no recommendation on these proposed amendments. You have before you Exhibit A, which I believe has to do with the second resolution with city code amendments. What you have before you is the proponent's proposed amendments, and then you have the Planning and Zoning Commission's proposed amendments. So you can go ahead and take a look at those proposed amendments, and if you want to certainly add something or delete something, that would be an amendment to the resolution. So.
Jeff, when you say staff, does that include animal control having no opposition or in favor, or do they have an opinion at all?
Mayor Mueller, Councilmember Gray, we actually worked with animal control on a number of these issues. In fact, animal control was actually very supportive of the banding issue that was brought up. In terms of staff, the community development staff certainly has no recommendation.
Right.
Like I said, we worked with animal control. We try to integrate some of their thoughts into some of this language.
But they were not asked if they were in favor generally or not.
Again, we worked with them. I mean, they had a lot of comments and recommendations, and we tried to incorporate those into the language.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are we ready to call the public?
Yeah.
Okay, Jeff, you done?
I'm done.
Okay, for now. At this time, we'd like to open up to call the public. Looks like we have a family that wants to come talk to us. I don't know who wants to talk first, whether it's Amy Wireman, Robert Wireman, or Daniel, whoever wants to come first. Okay.
I'm coming first. All right, Mayor Mueller and City Council members, good evening, and thank you for your work so far on this matter. I am in favor of allowing residents of Sierra Vista to have chickens in their backyards. I believe that tax-paying citizens have the right to do whatever they want on their property as long as it causes no harm to themselves or others. This is the most basic notion of liberty. I'm opposed to arbitrary restrictions and regulations imposed by city government. Raising chickens allows residents to provide fresh, healthy, high-protein organic foods for their families, along the same lines as having an organic backyard garden. This gives us control over the quality of our food. It allows us to educate our young children firsthand as to where our food comes from, and it teaches them the responsibility of daily chores. Science tells us that chickens are healthier than dogs. 6 hens produce about a pound of manure a day, the same as one mid-sized dog. Dog feces spread diseases to humans such as roundworm, hookworm, tapeworm, parvovirus, coronavirus, and salmonella, just to name a few. Chicken manure contains no such hazards with the exception of the possibility of salmonella, but according to the CDC, backyard chickens account for only 1 in 900 cases of salmonella. And actually, the statistics show that backyard chicken owners are less likely to contract salmonella than the general public. Chicken manure can be composted, used as fertilizer. Dog feces cannot. Chickens are maintained in backyards and on personal property. Dogs are frequently walked in public. You just have to take a stroll along one of our multi-use paths to see how many dog owners don't clean up after their pets. And this creates a health hazard for the public as well as other pets. This is not the case with chickens. As I stated, I am opposed to arbitrary restrictions. As it was stated earlier, there is the proposal to limit the number of chickens to 1 hen per 1,000 feet of property. Why? We have no such restrictions on residential dogs. The limit is not, as far as I can tell, based on any university research or government study. As a matter of fact, the University of Minnesota, Colorado State University, Utah State University recommend 2 to 5 square feet of space per hen specifically for backyard chickens. The USDA regulations for eggs to be considered organic is 3 to 5 square feet per hen. So what is the basis for the 1,000 square feet restriction? This is 200 times more stringent than the university and government recommendations. It has been said that government that governs the least governs the best. I am a leaning libertarian, and I agree with this notion. Government regulations for the sake of regulations is a waste of time and resources. Restrictions as to where chicken coops can be placed, tagging and certifying chickens without good reason is an infringement upon our rights as private citizens who pay taxes. As a citizen, I have the right to do what I want on my own property as long as it causes no harm to myself and others. We do not have any restrictions, or do we have restrictions on where a doghouse can be placed on your own property? I know that we do have restrictions on tags to certify that dogs are free from rabies, but can that same rationale be logically applied to chickens? Are we fearful of chickens getting out and spreading rabies? That's biologically impossible. After reading several posts online from individuals who believe that chickens should not be allowed within city limits, it seems to come down to two main fears: health risk and nuisance issues. Research shows that chickens are healthier pets than dogs and provide significant health benefits. Regarding the nuisance issues, we already have laws in place to deal with these. I get that some people just don't want to have their neighbors have chickens. I understand that. But these views seem to be based on fearful emotions and not on the rational assessment of facts. And I hope that this council, the city manager, and the Zoning and Planning Commission will base their decision on rational assessment of facts and not merely on feelings. This is an issue that is more about property rights than about chickens. Tax-paying residents should have the right to do what they want on their own property as long as they cause no harm, and I fail to see how any harm in allowing residents to have backyard chickens would come about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I forgot to mention we do have a 5-minute limit. You made it just under the wire, so good job. Who's next in the family? Okay. Amy, right? Yes, ma'am.
Mayor Mueller, council members, hello, and thank you for affording me the opportunity to speak this evening. If you research this topic, backyard chicken flocks are on the rise across the U.S. An estimated 1.2 million households across America have hens in their backyards today, and that number continues to grow. As a Sierra Vista resident and a healthcare provider here in town, I feel qualified to speak to the concerns regarding the primary health issues surrounding backyard chickens. Many have raised concerns regarding diseases carried or transmitted by hens. Some of these concerns are well-founded, and some are not. One thing we learned in medical school is that pertinent to this discussion is common things are common, so I will focus on the most common thing. Salmonella is the primary concern when raising backyard hens, and the Centers for Disease Control does provide common sense guidelines for citizens to follow when handling and caring for your flock. This information is readily available on their website. According to the CDC, the national incidence of salmonellosis is about 1 million cases per year, or 1 case per 326 U.S. citizens. As I stated, in the U.S., there is an estimated 1.2 million homes that raise backyard chickens. Last year, there were about 1,100 cases of salmonella linked directly to those backyard flocks. That's roughly 1 case per 1,200 homes. That is 73% lower than the national infection rate. Backyard chicken owners, who obviously encounter live poultry much more frequently than the average citizen, must do a better job of washing their hands than most people. I think that the concern here is unfounded, especially considering that salmonella is generally a self-limited illness and very rarely requires any medical intervention beyond rehydration and Imodium or Pepto-Bismol. Nowhere does the CDC recommend registering or tagging hens or affiliating any backyard animal husbandry program with the National Poultry Improvement Plan as currently proposed in the forthcoming ordinance. If such requirements are not needed for hens outside of city limits, it would seem to serve little purpose other than potential revenue generation or possibly placing barrier to ownership for those unwilling or unable to take this step. Sierra Vista is not the first town to have this debate over backyard chicken ownership. All across the U.S., many towns have agreed that small backyard flocks allow families a healthy organic food option, much like growing your own garden. We all grew up hearing, "You are what you eat," and to a large degree, this is true. Free-range chicken eggs are quite different than egg factory eggs. When you raise your hens, you know precisely what is in their diet and how the hens are cared for. The hen is healthier and the egg is healthier. Free-range chicken eggs are higher in vitamins A, D, E, omega-3 fatty acids, and they are lower in cholesterol. And while it's true that you can purchase free-range eggs for $4 to $5 per dozen, it's also true that I could buy organic tomatoes and zucchini, but I choose to grow those myself in my own garden, so why wouldn't I raise my own hens? They're quiet, pleasant animals. They can keep my yard free of insects, mice, small snakes, and weeds, and they produce manure, which I can compost and use to fertilize my garden. If they do produce excess eggs, I can then share them with my neighbors and my family members who would be ever grateful for the delicious and healthful eggs. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And next is Daniel.
Mayor Mueller and City Council members, thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I'm going to start off with some facts. Chickens aren't nearly as loud as dogs, and they produce less waste. I called Animal Control to get some information, and they said that in 2017, 450 complaints were made about barking dogs, whereas only 160 other complaints were made for other animal nuisances. These may not even include chickens. Chickens are not nearly as loud as dogs, and there aren't nearly as many complaints about dogs barking, or there aren't nearly as many complaints about chickens making noise in the morning as dogs barking at night. Another point, dogs have been known to bark all throughout the night, whereas chickens typically are louder from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. Chickens at their loudest are typically 60 to 70 decibels, about the same volume as two people having a conversation, whereas dogs barking are typically as loud as 90 decibels, roughly the same volume of a motorcycle. Chickens also kill harmful insects. The arbitrary statement saying that there should be 1 chicken per 1,000 square feet doesn't make any sense. I understand that it is an agreement point between the pro-chicken community and the community against chickens, but it isn't based on any university research or study done to determine the space required per chicken. Another reason that it is arbitrary is because people normally don't keep chickens all over their land. Typically, they have a run and coop where they keep their chickens. If someone had a 4-acre lot and they could have 173 or 174 chickens, but said person were to keep them all in a 1,000 square foot area, why would it matter if they had the other 3.2 acres? If chickens do have to be limited, why should it be based on the entire property size rather than actual space where the chickens live? In conclusion, chickens are less loud, less of a nuisance, and better for the environment than dogs. Yet I haven't heard one person saying that you should only be allowed to have 1 dog per 1,000 square feet of your land, or saying that if people want to keep their dogs, that they should have to move out of the residential areas and into the country. Dogs are a much bigger problem than chickens, but nobody thinks that they shouldn't be within city limits. Therefore, chickens should be allowed domestically. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. That was very well done. Well, next we'll ask Mr. Byer. Do you want to speak now, or you want to wait till? I'll speak now. Okay.
Mayor Mueller, Council, thank you for having us here. I just wanted to discuss the chicken issue because I actually started off in county with a house that I purchased. We've discussed this previously. My house was purchased when it was in county. I was not told that I would be annexed, and shortly after we purchased our house, we were annexed into the city. This was not something that I wanted to have happen because one of the reasons we bought the house where we were was to own chickens. The reason we wanted to own chickens was because my wife wanted to have a house where she could have a bountiful garden. We live in Arizona, and there are thousands and thousands of insects that just eat everything they possibly can every year. And one of those things is a bountiful garden. I can't combat the insects with chemicals effectively because of our monsoon seasons. I'm not that great of a gardener. My wife is actually the expert, but I'm the guy who gets sent out to kill these insects. And I'm just not that great at it. So I need these chickens so that they can take care of that problem for me. This to me goes beyond just a gardening issue, though. I honestly think that it's a rights issue. If I'm not harming my neighbors and I'm not hurting their lifestyle at all, and I'm not hurting myself, I feel that we should be able to own these birds. I think that it's something that benefits all of us as a community. If there were ever any food shortages or anything, we're going to need gardens and we're going to need chickens providing eggs, and we're going to need that here. We're not a major city. We're just not. I don't see any reason why we can't have them. And to me, this is a pursuit of happiness issue. So I would really like you to consider changing these rules so that we can all have these chickens in a reasonable setting. Thank you.
Thank you. Roxana McGinnis.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, Council, thank you for allowing me to speak. I'll keep this very short because the people before me have done such a great job. I just wanted to voice would allow chickens in the city limits. And I want to just provide a little bit of my personal experience, because they've done so well with the statistics, and Daniel did an amazing job of what I've experienced with chickens that I've had in other cities in the past. Before moving to Sierra Vista approximately 5 years ago, I lived in a city larger than Sierra Vista, had in 2007 passed a chicken ordinance allowing, I believe it was on a city lot. This city had even a lot more infill than Sierra Vista, and honestly, there were no problems with that within, I've heard in the last 10 years, and during a lot of that, my husband was working law enforcement, so, he would have heard, I did have friends on animal control and in dispatch, and we heard of no problems whatsoever that were caused by the chickens. Neighbors didn't hear them. They were quiet. I know of one loose chicken in 10 years that was promptly picked up in the Walmart parking lot by animal control. If you had only that many loose dogs, it would be a miracle. So I just really don't see how, there's very little negative. We had chickens. We actually, when we lived there, we did not live within the city, so we had chickens even before that because we lived in the county. But we lived in an area that was kind of on the interface of more town-type areas and then rural areas, so we had a lot of open space in the back. And honestly, the entire time that we had chickens, we never saw an increase in predators. We did have wildlife that ran through our neighborhood before and after chickens, and honestly, we never had a problem with any wildlife getting to our chickens or even making any attempt that we ever noticed. So I just wanted to say that here in Sierra Vista, I live on one of the larger lots in the city. I have 9/10 of an acre. I am the last house in the city limits. My neighbors are in the county. I have a lot of neighbors on smaller lots than I have who have chickens, even roosters. I hear them. And it's perfectly legal for them to do so because they're in the county. And here I am on an even larger lot, and at the moment can't even have a few hens. So I just wanted you to consider that we are very diverse. There's a lot of rural areas within the city, and my personal experience is just that the problems do not outweigh the vast benefits that have already been talked about. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And next we have Marquesa Graber. Did I get that right? No, obviously not.
Close enough. It's Marquesa Graber.
Marquesa. Okay.
Can I use this? Is this?
It should be.
Yeah. So I have a couple of pictures. First of all.
Well, yeah. Go ahead. It should be up.
Mayor Mueller and Council, I appreciate you listening to us again. I'm actually really happy to see all of this because when I started this a year ago, I had no idea what would happen. I've had to kind of push it back a little bit because I'm in school and class schedule conflicts, but I've had some really great help. Anyway, you guys have heard the pro side and the con side back and forth and upside down, everything. I want to talk to you a little bit about another outlook on this. It's from the animal welfare perspective, and I'm not referring to the perspective that is paid for by the commercial food industry. I would like you to consider the things that we know about chickens as a species. Chickens are social. They have individual personalities. They can recognize and bond with their owners, and they develop different social dynamics and hierarchies within their flocks. All of the things we know, the one that I want you to pay the most attention to right now is that chickens and ducks can feel and react to stress. And as others have mentioned, there are differences between the eggs that you can get from your backyard and the eggs that you can buy in the store. Just like we have differences in our health based on how much stress we experience in our day-to-day lives. So if you take that into consideration and then you look at the commercial chicken factories, much of what we think we know about eggs, about the eggs that we purchase at the grocery store, is false. Some of the labels, for instance, cage-free. Okay, what this actually means is that instead of a few chickens being overcrowded in small cages, you now have many chickens that are overcrowded in a factory. I want to show you a couple pictures to this effect. My printer ran out of ink, unfortunately, as I was about to print the final picture, but is this? Okay, so this is a cage, and you can see, I love how they don't put very many chickens in there, but when you look at the actual pictures of the factories, they're like right up against each other. So you're looking at 6 to 7 hens in a 67 to 86 square inch cage. Or square inches per hen. And the way that it works is quite similar in the appearance to what we see down here. This is the regulations for the cage-free factories, and that's 144 square inches per hen. Just for perspective's sake, 144 square inches is equal to 1 square foot per hen. Okay, so this right here, this is your factory farm, your cage-free egg farm, commercialized. Now, when you think about chickens and the way they interact with one another, one of the things that they do when they get really stressed out is they start pecking. They peck each other, they peck themselves, they pluck their feathers. So in these situations, you're looking at their solution is to cut off part of their beaks so that they stop pecking each other. It's not to fix the problem on why they're pecking, it's just to cut off their beaks so they can't do it anymore. Personally, I'm an animal lover, and this is outrageous to me. So if you turn that around and you think about the different diseases and things like that that come from these factory farms, it's been stated that backyard flocks are actually the solution to that. Well, humanely speaking, backyard flocks are the solution to that as well. So, sorry, I lost my spot on my paper. I want to address the issue of people saying, well, move out of the city. So I know I'm running short on time, but real quick, my husband and I met here over 10 years ago. And over the last decade, we always talked about where we want to live, what do we want to do. And it was always, I really liked Sierra Vista. Just about everything you could possibly want is here in this town. And it's all within like 10 minutes. I want to live here, and I want to have chickens. That's it.
Thank you very much. We have one more person that would like to address us on this issue, Mr. Newcomb.
Good evening, or good afternoon. I live outside, and I have seen coyotes taking off with pets several times, many times. So when people complain about the dogs, it's probably because someone's in the area. It might even be a squirrel. I have had ravens talk to me, telling me thank you for putting food out for them. I've had sparrows talk to me, saying bye-bye when I was leaving a place. They also say bye-bye when one of theirs is captured by a predator. I would like to move this planet towards multi-diversity. Racial amongst the Homo sapiens is just a family argument. Diversity on this planet would be for all of us to live together and to be able to communicate with each other. We have all kinds of different patterns of existence that would give us all kinds of different perspectives to solve our problems in the very near future and in the long-term eternity. Doing this with chickens, though it may look like slavery to the others, raccoons and horses and cows and everybody that's out there. It may look like slavery, chickens in the backyard, but it is a beginning towards a multi-diversity that would be true. Now, I know you all live in this world of eternity because you are reproducing. I live in a world where I see that they are killing one another to eat. This is an opportunity to move this planet into a place where we don't have vibrations of hate and fear that reaches out to God, so that God has to show up here again and correct us for our sinful ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. That concludes the folks. Is there anybody else that didn't fill out a form that would like to speak on this issue? Yes, sir. If you'd come forward, we'll get your name and address with the clerk. If you just come forward and introduce yourself, and then, ma'am, we'll do you next.
Mr. Mayor Mueller and council members, my name is Lex Heron. I moved here to Sierra Vista in '01, and I chose to move into the city. I did not particularly want to live in the country. Not that I have anything against animals per se, but I didn't really want to have horses, etc., around where I lived. I also live in a gated community, and in that gated community, we look after our roads, we pay for them, our street lights, and we have CC&Rs to restrict how we will live and the things we can and cannot do. I would respectfully suggest that the council consider the gated communities within Sierra Vista, where we have rules and which we choose to live by. And I think in accordance with perhaps one of the gentlemen said earlier on that he didn't like government telling him what to do. I could perhaps echo that, but we ourselves as a community, we decide how we'd like to live and we set the rules and we abide by them. So I'd respectfully suggest that you might consider either exempting gated communities. As I said, we pay for our own roads, street lights. We maintain the sidewalks, etc., which the city does not have to do. Or alternatively, you could consider allowing those communities to, if there are CC&Rs, restrict fowl, at least allow them to consider that and allow that to be effective for that community, and or if it's not within the CC&Rs, allow that community to decide. Because most of the people that live in the gated communities, in my opinion, are there because they want a controlled environment and they want to only have specified animals or cats or whatever they may have. And so that would be my suggestion. And I'm not speaking for the, I'm not representing the gated communities by any means. I'm speaking as a private citizen and a resident of that community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Heron. I think we've discussed this issue about CC&Rs and gated communities. Those are private agreements between landowners and their associations. My understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Attorney, if you already have prohibitions for whatever it may be that is in addition to what the city code establishes, those remain in effect. So if your homeowners association has a prohibition for birds or whatever it may be, then that still is in effect, and this action will not affect that because it's a private agreement between the homeowner and the association. Okay, is that right, pretty much? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, thank you, Mayor Mueller and council people. I appreciate the opportunity.
May I ask your name, please?
Yes, I am Gail White, and I live at 1406 Suffolk Road here in Sierra Vista. I want to add my voice to those who are in favor of chickens. My family got into raising chickens because of something that USDA put out years and years ago. During World War II, victory gardens were proposed so that families could support themselves during times of economic crisis. So they did not need social welfare programs. These, in many of the flyers that you can find in any of the World War II eras about this, it says a minimum of 2 hens per person in your family. I have 9 people in my family right now, and that would be 18 chickens. I would love that because, as we have established, they are very social animals. My husband was opposed to the idea of chickens for a long time. And then I caught him taking handfuls of feed as he walked in the back door to hang up his clothes, and the chickens would follow him. He had a train of 117 to 170 chickens following him from the front yard to the back door. And it was a casual thing. And at first I was like, why are the chickens following him? It took me about 2 months to catch on that he was giving them extra feed. And they loved him for it. We have, my daughter at the time, she was 8 years old when we got our first chickens. And she would take our chickens and put them in our hammock. And they would swing in our hammock. They are very personable. We would watch frog fights. The chickens would run around the yard, and they would grab the frogs, and yeah, it was a tug of war. It was kind of gruesome, but it was rather amusing considering we had a pond and the frogs would keep us up at night. My chickens never did. The one time that we heard our chickens going off was when we had a possum figure out how to get into the coop. You're not going to prevent every animal that wants a meal. You cannot. Every predator is going to find a way in. And I just want to say thank you for allowing us the opportunity to say, hey, I want to follow something that the government also suggested. It's not something for everybody, but it's something that I could give. If I had extra eggs, I could give it to a neighbor in need. And they wouldn't have to go and, go to social welfare services and say, hey, can I get a handout? My garden can hopefully one day produce enough that it will feed my family, it will feed my neighbors as needed. And if given the opportunity to have my chickens, that'll help as well. And I just want to thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you, Ms. White. Anybody else? Okay, we'll move on then.
We won't be voting on this until after the
tonight.
30-day.
Well, tonight we were putting it up for a 30-day public comment period. That's what the vote.
After that, we'll vote. Right?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion on this one? Because we're still gonna get a staff comments for 3. Yes, sir.
So my question would be is, I know 2 and 3 are closely aligned. If, with the planning and zoning recommendations, those are not currently included in the amendment that is in front of us today, correct?
The one we're talking about now is just the specifically to take chickens off of the agricultural animals in the development code. That's that's the item that's before us right now. Item 3 would be what you're talking about.
Then in that case, I don't have any questions yet until we get to the actual amendment part to 90.
Okay.
So.
Anybody else? I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. Now we go on to item number 3. Mr. Pregler, you want to give us a quick?
Do you want me to introduce it, Mayor?
We need to bring, yeah, excuse me, I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. Mount, please.
Mr. Mayor, I move that Resolution 2018-016, City Code Text Amendment, Chapter 90, Animals, Domestic Fowl, 30-day public comment period be approved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Mr. Pregler, do you have the staff report?
Again, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Again, there are no additional comments. The last comments related to the development code changes. This relates to the city code amendments. And so there are no additional comments at this time.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Mount, you had some comments.
Yeah.
Well, let me just officially, I'll open it up to the public again. If anybody wants to comment on this item, I think we've probably been there. Okay, I'll close the item to the public. Now, Mr. Mount.
I know there was a very brief discussion when we were in the city manager's office, and I know that when we were in your office, Jeff, earlier today, there was a brief discussion, but just for clarity's sake, maybe I'm confused. The planning and zoning recommendations are not included in this, and this right now is what staff has worked with the provisioners have recommended. Is that true?
Mayor Mueller, Councilmember Mount, if you look at Exhibit A, you'll see that the first set of amendments relates to the proponent's recommendations. And then under that, you'll see planning and zoning recommendations under Exhibit A. There are 3 separate recommendations. That is also part of Exhibit A. So if you want to include the Planning and Zoning Commission recommendations as part of your overall amendment, you can do that.
Well, Jeff, as we discussed earlier, and the way this works and has worked is we have a issue that has come before the Planning and Zoning Commission. They have made recommendations and amendments. That is what is before us tonight, not 2 separate issues. And I think we've had this discussion. So I don't understand what's going on, Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is, a situation that is a little different than what we usually deal with because generally, the items that are brought before you, and they could be from the public or other petitioners, usually go to staff for research, and then we draft the proposed language for you to consider, and you make amendments, et cetera. That really didn't happen in this particular case, so we have a set of items that were brought to you by the proponents. The council directed staff then to consider those at a meeting. Those are brought before you. The Planning and Zoning Commission, because it deals with code amendments, took a look at it and made some other recommendations. So I was left in the quandary of include all the P&Z recommendations. You had a discussion Tuesday at work session, and then amend the items to either add or take out, P&Z recommendations. In that case, it would be to take out P&Z recommendations. Or you have the option here of amending what has been proposed and then adding P&Z recommendations or others to the proposed amendments that were brought for you. And that's why.
And that's very convoluted, Chuck. And that's why when I had the conversation with your subordinates, I directed that we need to follow the same normal pattern where you have an issue that goes before the Planning and Zoning Commission. No, it doesn't make it whether it's chickens or anything else.
That's correct.
They come up before the Planning and Zoning Commission. In this case, it happens to come from the public rather than staff. At that time, Planning and Zoning made a recommendation with amendments. And that's what should be before us tonight, is the recommendation with amendments from the Planning and Zoning Commission. What we're doing tonight is what you're suggesting we do tonight, is we look at two documents. We look at the original proposal, which has been staffed, I would argue, which has gone to the P&Z, which has had amendments recommended. We don't have to accept them. But to me, that's the base document we need to be looking at as a council. We shouldn't be looking at the original proposal because there was an intervening commission that was responsible for making recommendations in between us. Where am I wrong?
I'm not saying you're wrong. It is my job to make the presentation to the council of the items. And I told you why I felt like it needed to be presented in this particular way, and that's what I did. I don't think it's that convoluted. I think it's the P&Z made some recommendations. One simple amendment to include all of them could be done in one fell swoop, or they could be done individually to add them if you preferred to have them. I'm basing that on what I saw on Tuesday, which was a lot of differences of opinion regarding the P&Z recommendations.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and muddle through this. So, where do you guys want to start?
Mr. Mayor, if I...
Alicia has a question.
Oh, sorry, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like some clarification, if possible, on the banding issue. At the work session, when that was discussed, I felt like the banding issue might be burdensome to community members, but also burdensome to animal control. But as far as animal control is concerned, I feel like I have that wrong. As I think you stated, they helped put that into the policy.
Mayor Mueller, Councilmember Ash, that is correct. Actually, banding was a recommendation from Animal Control. It was a way to not only monitor how many fowl our individual would have per property, but also allow them to identify the chickens and provide contact information. So if they did escape, they could contact those property owners and return the fowl appropriately.
Okay, thank you.
Well, while we're speaking about what's the acronym, Jeff?
NPIP?
NPIP certification. To me, I agree with one of the comments from the public tonight. That, to me, makes no sense, especially when you look at the fact that the chickens that are available for commercial purchase, and I'm assuming that's where most people are getting their chicks, in Arizona already have that. So I'm not sure why that's a requirement. And I think that's one thing that we don't need in the amendment. So since that was brought up, I'll just mention that is one thing. Yes, ma'am.
No, and I watched Tuesday's meeting, Mayor, and you alluded, I think, to some of this, but in this proposal, I'm not seeing some questions that I have about remanded chickens or I understand development code, I understand all that, but what will happen to remanded chickens? How will animal control be able to handle that once it becomes their issue? And I don't see that addressed in this policy. So I don't know what we need to do about that.
Go ahead, Mr. Stitchick.
Mayor Mueller, members of the council, with regards to the proposals, as you know, I'm recommending against, but in listening to the public tonight, I think some very good points were made with regards to the arbitrariness of some of the recommendations. I think they add to the enforcement burden of both the staff and animal control. Banding, counting of chickens, all those things. If we do get complaints about chickens from neighbors in the future, it's going to be very difficult to enforce numbers of chickens, whether or not they're banded. Chickens could be purchased as chicks and can't be banded until they're adults. You know, things like setbacks and all those kind of things, I think would be very, very difficult to enforce.
And it's not just the enforcement of, I mean, I'm thinking Easter, everyone buying the cute little chickens and like at Christmas with the dogs, and then our animal control is overrun. Is our animal control facility able to even handle remanded chickens?
Can
Or
I make a
chickens
comment
that have
about
been turned in or taken?
I will make a comment. I remember when a presentation was made that there is a sanctuary in the community or in the area that should, two of them, so that should there be delinquent chickens, they will be taken to a sanctuary and properly reprimanded for their behavior.
Understand that. I understand that, Gwen, but we also have many a dog and cat rescue operations in our city too, and our shelter is still overrun. So that's still a concern of mine.
Okay.
So I guess my question in all of that discussion was not to debate what we're going to do with chickens that are taken or whatever. My question is, how is this in the policy, and how are we going to handle it?
Yeah, I think before we put staff to the task of that, there's a couple things along those same lines. I think they're valid questions. However, what I think we start off with is, one, do we allow it to happen? And we have 30 days, assuming this goes through, for the public to weigh in for us to get to that point.
Yes.
Another, and you know this, so I'm not trying to be belligerent. I know that much larger cities and much smaller cities have gone down this same path, and they've fallen into anarchy. That our staff up with a plan, and then the is in the lawsuit. I don't know if it's council's responsibility, nor should it be, or our prerogative to come back and question how staff, enforces law or enforces code. Does the actual work that takes place? It's for us to understand what the intrinsic legal policies, is it clear, executable, precise, et cetera.
And the costs associated with that.
True, absolutely, and that could be something that's a trade-off for the public.
But that is
It is something that should be considered. As far as this, Mr. Mayor, then, and I didn't know if Ms. Ash even had her question answered, or even if Ms. Gray did. I can pause. If not, I do have a recommendation, at least on how to continue. Looking at what's been presented to council from planning and zoning, which appears to be the questions that are at hand, we've got the 4 recommendations that are outlined in our reading material. So it's how many domestic fowl per square foot. It's, is there a cap on the number of chickens that are allowed? I do believe that the mayor brings up a good point, and I agree, I think others will too, that the NPIP program, I think, is not appropriate for this level of provision, and it's already there, it's voluntary. And I personally won't really weigh left or right on the sunset provision. If it works, it'll work, and we'll know, and we'll go from there. So I think, Mr. Mayor, my recommendation is the two other points, which is, if we're all in agreement that they're not asking for any reduction in our standards for noise and odor, et cetera, then do we need a square foot limit? And I would actually be okay with that, and I'll explain that later, because I know some people may not agree with it, and a cap. And again, I think that would be prudent, and I can explain that as we go through it. The bottom line is, right now we're working with 0, so how do we find progression? So I'd throw that over there, Mayor, as the 2 big key points that we need to kind of figure out before we throw it out to the public, to make sure the public clearly knows.
And I'd agree with you to make sure that the public knows what the parameters on for comment. I think we do need a square foot limit or a cap. I think the 20 is way too many. As I've already discussed, the NPIP program, to me, just doesn't make sense. I think you're right, Craig, in the fact that whether we have a sunset or not, we can address this at any time in the future. So to me, I would be willing to entertain a motion to see. Here's the problem, Chuck. We amending the recommendation of the P&Z because this wasn't incorporated in the base document.
Well, I think you can have an amendment to add the two items that you discussed. And if you want to change the number, I think the amendment can just reflect the number that you want instead of the restriction.
Then what I'd like to do is I'd just take these one by one. The first one is the number of fowl per square feet. It was recommended that we go to 1 fowl per 2,000 square feet. Oh, excuse me. Let me make sure.
Can you go back to that slide, Jeff?
I'll try.
Mr. Mayor,
they were going to up the square footage.
You're correct. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation was 1 domestic fowl per 2,000 square feet of lot area. The proponent's recommendation was 1 domestic fowl per 1,000 square feet of lot area.
I understand that.
Cap.
So the question.
No cap.
The question then would be, and we're talking the base document. The way the staff is presented is the proponent's document, correct? So what we're doing then is I would ask if there's going to be an amendment to change the square footage based on the recommendation of the P&Z or other. Do I have an amendment?
I think I know what you just said.
So that's, Chuck?
Well, we were discussing before we came up how to handle this particular situation if it came up, which it has. The proponents, the amendment that I can see in the discussion would be to take the proponents 1 for every 1,000 square feet and maybe cap it at 8, so that if you had an SFR 8 property, you would have up to 8 fowl allowed. And even if you had a property over that, it would still be capped at 8.
Well, that's one way of doing it. We could kill two birds with one stone. Pardon the pun, there, guys. But again,
so to speak.
But again, that would address items number 1 and 2 if it was 8 or 10 or whatever as a.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I think that I like the idea of the 1 domestic fowl for maybe it's a pal for 1,000 square feet. I think the idea of generally capping it at 8 would be good, and then a very clear waiver process for people who have larger properties to increase that.
Craig, would you repeat that? I'm so sorry, I didn't catch all of it.
So 1 per 1,000. I'll let a cap that is at least 8, and I'll let you guys fight over where it's going. At least 8, and then a waiver process that's very clear, very easy for people who think that they have a large enough property, because I know we have some properties that are fairly good size in the city still.
Or large families.
Or large families. And if there's a waiver process that's very clear, very easy, controllable, executable, that waiver process be included as well to increase the cap beyond where it needs to be. And then go ahead.
No, I want to clarify. So a 4,500 square foot lot would be allowed 4 chickens.
4.5.
I knew somebody was going to say that, and that's gross. But am I correct in that? Yes. Okay. Sure. And so an 10,000 square foot lot would still be only allowed 8 chickens unless they got a waiver approving more chickens. Is that correct?
That's the way I understand
it. It's progress, and that's what I think for right now would be a good step forward from 0.
Okay. Mr. Mayor,
Eight's good with me.
I think that's a fair.
Two
Matt?
questions. First of all, who would grant the waiver and what would the criteria be that would be considered in approving a waiver? Would it be administrative, subject to neighbor sign-off, or would it be through council with a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission, or are we going to have objective criteria? I guess would
We have
to help us in the drafting of the requested amendment.
My idea would be is to take some of those ideas, let's make it part of the 30-day process and kind of weigh it out. I like the idea that if they're asking for more than the standard, then yeah, maybe that's the point where we ask for the neighbors to sign off. I think that's a fair compromise. And I think that it should walk through your normal, however y'all normally do waivers for things. You know,
He's talking an administrative process where it would
Okay.
basically be an application. Say I need an additional 3 or 4 or whatever it is, and here are my reasons. If it's reasonable, it's granted. If it's weird, it becomes more fun.
Mayor, as happy as I am to continue talking about chickens, there is still a lot of unanswered questions, as we can see tonight talking, and how are we going to do things and how are they going to be handled. So I'm not even sure that I'm ready to put this out to a 30-day public comment period at this time, because we still have too many questions unanswered. So I don't know what to do about that.
Well, one of the things you could do is you could ask to postpone this item for another time.
Okay, can I do that now?
Sure.
Would I amend?
You just make a motion.
Okay, I would like to make an motion to table this until we get more of the questions answered that we've had asked tonight.
Do we have a second? Second? Fails for lack of a second.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we continue the discussion.
so that's my best and final offer, Mayor.
Okay. What I need then is a motion from somebody to amend the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission.
I make a motion to amend the Planning and Zoning Commission recommendations to such state 1 domestic fowl for every 1,000 square feet, not to exceed 80 birds, 80 hens.
Eight.
Oh, 80? Did I say?
Oh my God.
I prefer the 80.
8.
Okay.
Not to exceed 8 without a waiver, with the understanding that the waiver has to be worked out.
Yeah. And it'll probably have to be added an additional comment period. Okay.
Sure.
Okay. So that, everybody
amendment?
understand the amendment?
That's the amendment.
Discussion on the amendment.
Need a second?
And is this?
Oh, excuse me, second. We need a second on the amendment.
Second on the amendment. Is,
Did you second it?
yes.
Okay.
And then I have a question.
Okay, discussion.
Are we voting, and this is also very confusing, and I apologize, but is this amendment that we're voting on then also sending what we are amending to 30-day public
ma'am.
hearing?
That's why it's being amended tonight, rather than
Okay.
waiting to the end of the
Okay.
period.
I'm going to go ahead and vote in favor of a 30-day public hearing and hope that these questions get answered. And Matt, I have every faith in you that you will. I still am opposed to having fowl in our city limits, but I do believe in the purity of having a 30-day public comment period, so I will vote yes to that. But these questions really need to be answered.
Okay, any other discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. I would also like to propose an amendment. I'll step out of the chair for a minute.
Okay.
And the item number 3, the poultry registration, I would like to remove that requirement entirely.
Second.
Second.
So we have moved and second. Any further discussion?
I'm sorry, which one is that?
The registration of the National Poultry Improvement Program is required.
Oh,
That
yeah,
whole
because
paragraph.
that's already done, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I second that.
Okay, so we've moved and seconded. All right, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Is there going to be any discussion, any further discussion on the sunset provision?
I don't care one way or the other if we have it.
Mr. Mayor, I move to remove the sunset provision.
I second.
Second, any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? 1. 6-1. Thank you very much. Matt, any
The tagging?
So what?
Tagging?
Well, that's part of the PIP. That's gone.
I thought that was separate.
Was that separate? Where's that? Separate.
The banding?
Banding.
Banding.
Yes.
Banding.
Can you go back to that, please?
Where?
Right
Well,
here.
I'm looking.
Wait,
I'm following the items you provided for us from the Planning and Zoning Commission, Jeff.
The banding out. I think that was in the base document.
Yeah, that's in the base
In the
document.
base document.
So, but I do agree.
The amendment was to get rid of the banding as well as in PIP. That was my recommendation.
Ending too.
Okay.
Did anybody miss? If they have a misunderstanding, I'll withdraw and we'll go ahead and start over again.
No, I don't think you're mistaken, but just to be clear, I can make an amendment, Mr. Mayor, to remove the requirement for banding, given the enforcement nature of it is nigh impossible.
Onerous, at least.
Well, yeah, you buy a chick, you can't get it banded until it's however old. And so, Mr. Mayor, I make an amendment to remove any provisions for the banded using, for the domestic fowl being required to have banded tags provided by the Sierra Vista Animal Control.
The mayor's already done that.
Well, he's just clarifying
Oh, he's clarifying your amendment.
in my amendment.
Now, the NPIP is
Okay.
different.
I should have been more specific.
Okay.
Any second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Further discussion? Yeah, the banding requirement. Okay. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? 1. So it's 6-1. Thank you very much. Now,
Are we
any
done with
further
chickens?
discussion on this item, council members? Okay, and we know what we're putting out to the public for the 30-day comment period?
Well,
Yes, sir.
Okay, we all clear at least, okay. All right, then. We'll move on to the next item. Oh, excuse me, we'll call, I almost got getting ahead of myself here. Now that we've amended the motion, I would ask any further discussion on the motion as amended with many amendments. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. We're out for a 30-day period. And now, Jeff, you can sit down for a minute, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
And when will this come back to council?
It'll be 30 days, so it'll probably be the April meeting. Okay. Finally, new business. Ms. Gray, item number 4.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that the City Council regular meeting minutes of February 8th, 2018 be approved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any comments, questions, corrections, additions, deletions?
Well, no.
Okay. Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. We now move on to item number 5. Mrs. Calhoun, please.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I move that Resolution 2018-017, conveyance of 314 North 2nd Street, APN 106-71-200, to Cochise College Foundation for educational purposes be approved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. May we have the staff report, please, Mr. McLaughlin?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, the Cochise College Foundation has expressed an interest in undertaking a much-needed redevelopment on a parcel of land that the city acquired through the Balmer Settlement Agreement. The subject property is located on the west side, 2nd Street North, just south of Tacoma Street, and was formerly used as a trailer park. The site, which is part of the second addition to the town site of Fry subdivision, is composed of 2 60-foot wide and 140-foot deep platted lots that can be built upon individually with single-family homes. The property is currently within a county enclave that is under consideration for annexation. The foundation proposes to construct 2 single-story, 3-bedroom, 2-bath homes, approximately 1,250 square feet over the course of 2 academic school years, with the first home starting this fall. This endeavor will provide students enrolled in a one-year certificate program, real-world, hands-on experience, with all work being supervised by a local licensed contractor. Each home would be sold at market rate, and any profits being retained for subsequent projects. As documented in this request, the program is being supported by several local contractors that are struggling to find and hire trained workers. On the public side, we'll see the benefit of a revitalized property in a neighborhood suffering from disinvestment. For these reasons, we recommend that the City Council convey said property to the Cochise College Foundation as provided in the resolution, and Dr. Rottweiler is here to elaborate on the proposal if desired by the
questions?
City Council.
Okay. Staff's report, questions, discussion by council? Yes, ma'am.
I have one question. I recall us approving this whole arrangement that was made around the Balmer properties, but I'd like you to please remind us of why and if we made the decision that this property was not to be sold and the funds go back into our general fund because of the cost of the whole cleanup matter. I think that's pretty much my question there.
Mr. Patuchik.
Thank you, Mayor Mueller, members of the council. When we entered into the Fry cleanup program with Cochise County, the proposal brought to the council was then to clean up the properties and then get them ready for potential sale or give to a nonprofit such as the Cochise College Foundation to then improve the properties and make them better. I think the outstanding question that you're getting at, Ms. Calhoun, is you know, if the public did indeed put money into this cleanup, how do we recoup some of these funds? And here we're taking a look more at the public benefit of getting properties cleaned up, getting them improved, working with the College Foundation, and training future students for suitable employment in the future. I think the actual value of the lots are very low, and I don't think we would recoup that many dollars from the sale of them anyway.
Okay.
Can I just add real quick that the other thing Chuck forgot to mention is they actually get on the tax rolls, so that once the property owner owns it, he's paying taxes, even though it may be minimal. And the reason why they were available is because the previous owner had an issue with that.
That's correct.
Well, I think what the plan is for the use of that property, it will benefit the entire community because of the way it will train citizens, young folks in our community, or maybe some older folks, to what they'll be learning in the construction industry and probably other adjacent industries. So I'm in favor of this. I just wanted it clarified for the public why we're using it in this way rather than trying to recoup dollars.
Directly.
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions, discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. We now move on to item number 6, Mrs. Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that Resolution 2018-018, appointment of Rebecca Bjork and George Broxton III to the Tourism Commission, said terms to expire December 31st, 2019, be approved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion?
I see Ms. Bjork.
Bjork is here. Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am. Glad you're here. All right, I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. Congratulations. We'll next move on to item number 7, Ms. Ash.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that Resolution 2018-019, appointment of Teresa Longmore and Kelly Norris to the Commission on Disability Issues, said terms to expire December 31st, 2019, be approved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded.
They're both here.
And they're both here, so welcome.
Jeff, do we have a quorum now? Is he still in here? I think we have a quorum now. Thank you so much for serving.
Yeah. Any other comments, discussion? I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. Congratulations. We now move on to item number 8, Ms. Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that Resolution 2018-020, appointment of Colleen Barron to the Sierra Vista Library Advisory Commission, said term to expire December 31st, 2019, be approved.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. Any comments or discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. We now move on to item number 9, Mr. Matt.
Mr. Mayor, I move that Resolution 2018-021, the appointment of Kristen Welch to the Arts and Humanities Commission, said term to expire December 31st, 2019, be approved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any comments, discussion? Seeing none, we'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much for your volunteering, commissioners. We next move on to item number 10, Ms. Ash.
Mr. Mayor, I move that Resolution 2018-022, authorization to proceed with legal action, be approved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. This is a continuation of an item that was discussed in executive session and in city council meeting approximately 1 month ago regarding Cochise County case number CV 2016-0061, in which the city is named as a defendant. Approval of this item would allow the city attorney and by extension our contract attorneys to settle this case with the plaintiffs.
Any questions, discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. We now go to call to the public. We have one person that would like to address us tonight. Excuse me, and I know I'm going to slaughter this name, so I apologize ahead of time. Namphi Pettit? Namphi?
It's Nephi.
Nephi.
Yeah, close enough, though. Mayor Mueller and City Council and members of the city, I'm addressing you all to help stand and make a difference. We can unite to fix issues, maybe only a few at a time, but we can be the solution. Recently, the shootings that have been happening in schools have opened our eyes to some horrors, and it weighs heavy on our hearts to see such tragedy. It is obvious that our children need to be protected. It is obvious that they currently don't have the protection that they need. I need you all to imagine, if you will, a better world, a safe place where our children can be safe to worry about struggles that life already provides when you're at that age. Going to school, worrying about tests or the homework that you forgot to do. A place where they can be prepared for the hardships of life in their future. And they can be prepared to take on the baton that is passed to them when this time comes. They're already aware of these issues in the world, these shootings being one of them. These schools need to be secure and safe. Security needs to be armed and watching these entrances, always. We need good officers watching over these schools to deter and act against these acts of terror that might come upon the future of our world. Metal detectors need to be put in place at the entrances with the armed security monitoring them. If teachers are willing to undergo a psych evaluation to carry a weapon at school and be trained to use it, then that should be allotted. We as the people can raise money to fund this and to fund it, to keep it funded for years to come. There are many issues that need to be resolved, yes, and this charity can expand to reach out to solve other issues in time, perhaps. But we will start by solving one issue at a time and ensure the safety of our future, our children. I'll be collecting signatures on a petition to get this started. I've already been gathering signatures. I did not bring them with me, however. This needs to be a countrywide effort, but we can start by making this a statewide effort. I would look to the council to get the schools and police departments approved for more staffing. Staffing for our schools, including security, that is armed, trained, and have gone through psych evaluations, so they're prepared for this. The coordinating of all of these pieces of this plan will take time, and the funding may be the biggest factor in the time that it will take. So, city members, I am looking to you to take action. We are responsible for the safety of our children. In time, and hopefully in time, and hopefully sooner than later, we can get a foundation set in place to continuously accept donations countrywide to get funding for our schools, our police departments. But this needs to start here with us, and it will spread. Let us be the example of how to get things done. And I know that they do have the ALICE program that is in effect. It is great to be prepared, but we can do more to prevent. We need to have the goal to be to stop the threat at or before the entrance. I believe in all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate you coming tonight. And I just want to make sure the community understands when these incidents happen, whether in Florida or the incident we had recently south of town, our police does go back and review what worked, what didn't work, other recommendation, and they work with the governing board. And that is a recommendation I have to you, sir, is if you haven't scheduled already, that you take the opportunity to go to speak to the governing board of the school board as well, and probably the county supervisors and the sheriff's office, obviously. So thank you for addressing us tonight on that critical issue. Okay, comments and requests to council. Tonight we start with Mr. Blanchard. Bob?
I have nothing.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchard. Ms. Wolf?
I have nothing.
Thank you, Ms. Wolf. Mrs. Gray?
I have nothing.
Oh, Mrs. Calhoun?
Thank you.
Always one.
I know we're running a little late, but I have to say, first of all, thank you to all of those who have offered their time to serve on commissions. It's very important to our community. It's another way to have community input into the functioning of the city government. I want to thank especially Mr. Pettit for coming to speak about school safety. That's foremost on all of our minds right now. And I'm sure we all have various solutions to this issue, and I think we need to all come together to figure out what will work best in our community and then further on in our state. I want to put in a plug for the March for Mental Health, which the local National Alliance on Mental Illness Southeast Arizona branch is going to conduct on April 22nd. I'm sorry, April 21st. I just heard a voice tell me. April 21st, and it will be at the Rothery Education Center. And also our West End Commission is working on the West End Fair, which will be May 5th. So please mark your calendars for that, those two events, and you'll be hearing more about them as we move forward. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mrs. Calhoun. Mr. Mount?
As I can be. The first is obviously on the discussion of the chickens, and I want to thank the public. I know that when this, for me, is almost an exercise in can we find a compromise as a community and not zero-sum that we make. All too often, I feel that we're left with choices of all or nothing, and I don't know if that necessarily represents a community of people who have a very diverse set of opinions and values and of what these real big subjects are. I know when Marquesa first brought it up a year ago, several of us on council, I think most of us on council, were actually just very appreciative of the way that she went about doing it. It was very professional. It was very dedicated. She did a lot of research. She did a lot of work, and it was her project. And it wasn't just somebody coming up and maybe we deserve it, but berating the council for not doing something. It was, here's a problem. I want to solve it. What are the steps to go about and work with it? She worked, amazingly with our city staff. Matt's team has been amazing, at least through, not at least, amazingly on the subject. And I think for me, it sets a very clear use case of how the public and the city could work together to solve a lot of different problems. And I know people say we're spending too much time talking about chickens. I think that if we're going to talk about something, let's talk about chickens and figure out how to learn how to talk to each other, and then figure out how to take those best practices and apply them to the really big problems that we all face as a community. I will say that coming through this, myself and I think most on council, we don't have a chicken in the fight. I was going to say a dog in the fight, but we don't have a chicken in the fight. I will never own a chicken. I have dogs, and I barely like them, but I have dogs. What I do know is this. I know that we're not all going to get what we want in this exercise. You're not going to get unlimited chickens. But at the same time, I think that chickens probably should be considered, and let's see what happens. And I do realize that there's a lot of administrative questions. I respect that, and I think as we start to work through that, we won't get it right initially, but we have the ability to go back. So with that, I say thank you. The second thing is thank you very much for the people who volunteer to be on the commissions. We're hurting. I need help with the Cultural Diversity Commission. We need help there. But I appreciate the people who do. And lastly, and this is maybe kind of weird, but I missed the work session on Tuesday. I was down in Tampa, Florida, at the Global United States Special Operations Command Symposium. I do some work down in there, and I was lucky enough to hear a number of speakers, but one of the speakers who got up and spoke was General Talib Al-Kanani from Iraq, and he was responsible for leading the Iraqi offensive against ISIS and the other terrorists that had taken over his country. And I think it was prudent to bring it up is the two groups of people that he got up and thanked through his translator profusely, and I've never heard somebody actually get up and thank is genuinely for the service that people do, and he's living there, obviously seeing what's happening. One was obviously our special operations community, but he made a very big point to bring up our intelligence community. And obviously with that being nested right here home at Fort Huachuca and in Sierra Vista, and with so many of us who have connections back into that community, I thought it was prudent to bring that back and let the community know that that work has not just benefited, it's truly changed an entire country's history. And they were very happy to be celebrating their liberty after a year of wiping out the group that had occupied their lands and killed so many other people. So with that, Mayor, I appreciate your time, and thank you, Council, for another good session.
Thank you, Mr. Mount. Ms. Ash.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would first like to give a quick shout out to the young people that were in the audience today, the Boy Scout. Daniel, great job, young man, wonderful. And all the other young people who came to the council meeting today. I think that's great to get engaged at a young age. And speaking of youth, don't forget about the Youth Arts Festival happening on Saturday, this coming Saturday, at Cochise College from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. It's a free event hosted by the Arts and Humanities Commission, so please come and bring all your friends. It'll be really fun.
Thank you, Ms. Ash. I'm just going to end by tonight by thanking everybody for being here and having a great discussion on an issue that is of interest to our community. I'm sure we will come to a accommodation to make sure that the folks that don't expect to have that moved here to a suburban area and didn't expect to have chickens as their next door neighbors, and those folks that may want to raise chickens next door. So hopefully we'll get that worked out in the next couple of months. Seeing nothing else before the council, meeting's adjourned. Thank you.